May 4th, 2023 to order. We will start with opening remarks and pledge by Jason Watterson.
I'd like to do my opening remarks in the form of a prayer tonight. Our Heavenly Father, we're grateful for this day. We're grateful for the opportunity that we have to live in this beautiful community and for the blessed state that we have here. We're grateful for the water we received this winter season, and we ask that Thou would temper the elements that we might be able to make it through the runoff without significant damage. And we ask Thee to bless those who are suffering challenges at this time due to flooding. We ask Thee to bless this meeting and us tonight, that we may be able to have our minds open and be able to do things that will benefit the residents of this community and help us to have a vision for the future. And these things we ask for in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen. Please join with me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, review and approval of the agenda. Is there any changes, Angie?
Just one minor thing. Item 1, Mount Sterling subdivision, should read Mount Sterling Acres, but that's
Okay, Mount Sterling Acres. Okay, with that, commissioners, take a request to approve the agenda.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, second?
Second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, how about the minutes from our April 6th meeting? So everyone read those and seen if there's anything changes that need to be done?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the minutes from.
Okay,
Second.
moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, perfect. Okay, the next four items on the list, just for the audience, are consent items, meaning that they meet all the requirements under the current county code to be approved without any changes to those. So unless the proponents of those have questions with the conditions that have been put on them, we will probably move forward with approving those. So is anyone that is part of those four have any concerns with the conditions that were agreed to on those? If not, I would look for a motion to approve those four items. The Mount Sterling Acre subdivision, Westview Estate subdivision, Carrie Ann Anderson subdivision First Amendment, and the Willow Lane subdivision First Amendment.
So moved.
Okay, and moved.
Second the motion.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that was easy. I figured that's what most people were here for. We're moving right along.
You can stick around if you want.
2/3 of the way through the agenda.
Yeah,
2 minutes in. We're doing good.
We're flying through.
Yeah, I just have a question on the Mount Sterling subdivision. How can we find out what requirements are there? Our family owns the property right next to this.
So it will be posted, the minutes and the conditions that are put on each of these items is posted on the county's website under Planning Commission. So if you go to Cache County's,
So they're currently on there?
that. Not currently. I recognized when I was here that I forgot to do that, but let me give you a copy of the staff report.
she'll give you a copy right here and you can see. So what conditions they have to do, that's what you were asking, what they've got to do as part of that subdivision.
They will.
She'll have those for you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, yep, no problem. Okay, the regular action items, dog boarding project, conditional use permit.
So I'm going to talk slow because
They're not here quite yet?
Well, no, she is.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
Tim's next up on the docket. but
yeah,
She's just watching on YouTube.
Okay,
So
perfect.
so just, yeah, speak up so she can hear you. 'cause she
Perfect.
is On YouTube watching.
okay.
All right. Yeah, and this is, you may remember this from last month, where one of our conditions talked about that 50-foot setback that needed to be maintained.
Yep.
We were able to confirm that it's not 50 feet. It is 50 feet to the wall of the building, but not the overhang. So the applicant does want to apply for a variance, but County Council is currently in process of perhaps appointing a hearing officer instead of reappointing a Board of Adjustments. So we don't currently have that
Option,
land use
yeah.
authority in place to hear a variance. So what we've done instead is revised condition number 2 on page 6. That just allows the applicant to use the portion of the structure that's within the 50-foot setback for the dog facility unless and until a variance has been approved. So that will just help them move forward with making decisions on whether to purchase the property or not, and then allow them to use that purpose-built structure that was previously used for a kennel, if that variance goes through, to use that overhang as well to
Yeah.
the east. But yeah, that is the only change.
Okay, any questions for Angie from the Planning Commission? Any?
Nope, that answered my question.
Yeah, that was the only thing from,
Yeah.
from the holdover.
Yeah. Anyone
What
from,
is
Is this
the,
an amendment?
It is not an amendment, just a
Because we-
revision of
yeah.
the condition.
because we didn't approve it yet.
You did approve it, yeah.
and the setback is that supposed to be 50?
It's supposed to be 50, yeah, we determined that the overhang part of that
Right.
structure is within it, but since there's not a body to hear a variance request right now, we just did that to.
Let's move forward.
Great.
Yeah, I'm sorry for this question. Did I hear correctly? So regardless of the outcome of a variance request, that portion within 50 would be
Yes.
useful. Okay, thank you.
Okay, is there anyone from the audience that would like to speak to this? Okay, with that, then I'll,
Make a motion that we approve the dog boarding project conditional use permit with its, let's see, how many conditions? 5 conditions?
10.
10
10
conditions
Oh, gotta
and
scroll
2
down.
conclusions.
And 2 conclusions.
I second the motion.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Just like that, we're already to the last item on the agenda. 7 minutes in, that record
I really
time.
thought I'd be done by 5:30, but I'm a little.
Well, you're slacking just a little then. We'll expect that next time.
All right, Tim, it's all yours.
All right, we'd like to continue conversations from a few months ago regarding density calculations as relate to sensitive lands. And I know there was a desire to explore this in a combined work meeting with Council and Planning Commission, and there was very limited time in that meeting. And this could be revisited, but I think the direction for now is to bring it back and at least continue to discuss and then see where it needs to go from there. And we've revisited as staff, and we'd like to share with you some updated thoughts based on the feedback that was received from a couple of months ago. And so just for remembrance and review, this is a depiction of 40 acres. Each of those areas, left, middle, and right, represent 40 acres and approximate 1 unit at 10 acres, 4 lots per parcel in a subdivision. And so the middle lot represents no sensitive lands and therefore no deduction of the gross acreage to net acreage, and therefore 4 lots as the gross and net density that could be achieved. The right image, it represents that if there were some non-developable wetlands, and let's say that those wetlands represent 1 or 2 acres, then that 40 acres becomes 38 net acres and would only be eligible for 3 lots under our current code. But this represents if that was a gross density calculation based on the full 40, not deducting the wetlands, then it would be perhaps a similar development pattern to what's shown in the middle acreage diagram. And then on the left, there could be substantial area of the 40 acres, and I will note that the 40 acres limits where this kind of bolded dark line is, and then it kind of represents the context of steeper slopes continuing up a mountainous area. And so, in this case, if the steep slopes were not deducted from the gross acreage, and a net density of maybe 10 acres or 15 would result in one lot. But if that was not applicable as it is currently in our code and no longer applied, and steep slopes were not deducted from the equation, then this is what it could look like, is that the areas, developable areas less than 30% could be homes placed on them. And this represents that perhaps if a private road, if our code was amended to allow for a private road to be built on slopes greater than 30%, then someone may want to drive up to a view lot location. So this is kind of at the heart of what we've been hearing, a desire from you, the Planning Commission, to discuss and explore and share your recommendations to the council. And then we have some text that kind of takes this to the, I think, in reaction to some of the feedback we've received from you in the past. So, if I may, I'd just like to jump over to some
Hey, Tim,
text,
can I
but
just
please.
say real quick?
Yeah,
You know, just in looking at the graphic, so the options there, we have in the county a minimum lot size of a half an acre.
correct.
So any of the development scenarios shown here assume, like, if it is a 40-acre parcel, that there's still at least 2 acres that can be subdivided into half-acre lots.
Correct, and
There's buildable portion, and yeah, so for what it's worth, just wanted to point that out and make sure I understood, you know, what the current requirements are.
thank you. I glossed over that or didn't address it, and that's true, that the minimum lot size is half acre. However, for practical and code-related purposes, to meet state and county standards for a well and a septic system, we typically see lots as small as 1.5 to 2 acres, but not much smaller,
Yeah.
to meet those standards.
We did see prior to the county slowing growth a little bit, specifically northwest corner of Smithfield, there was a number of lots there that were under an acre. And
Did they share wells, or did they have single wells and single septic systems, or were they shared wells?
I'm not really sure on the wells, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I think they were all separate wells and separate septics, but there was, and the bad thing about it, I was hoping you could maybe touch on it a little bit. For some reason, I always forget how our ag remainder comes into play. Because in those subdivisions that I'm referring to, there was multiple of them. Northwest of Smithfield, there was a couple out in Mendon area, but they would originate with 20, 10, I don't know, somewhere in the, you know, they could have only got 1 to 2 regular lots, but they went with the RU2, and they would break them down into, I know there was half-acre lots, 3/4 acre lots, and then they'd put the rest into an ag remainder, but it remains to be seen, as quick as we change, can they come back in and break them up again, or? And I'm not trying to deter from that, but I just know that there was a number of lots out there.
Yeah, they
that were-
wouldn't be able to break that up anymore because they've already maxed their RU2 density out.
But even in what you're saying, there was multiple lots that were less than.
Yeah, because I think in the past, 5/8 of an acre you could get both of those on there. And so some of the measurements may have changed, but there were a number in the past that were down to that 5/8 to 3/4, and you could fit the septic and the well, just barely.
If
I mean,
they have the
it was-
right
it was
soil
pretty
conditions.
tight. Yeah, different soils. It was pretty tight, but there are a number that are under an acre that you could meet that with.
So Tim, if I could just to clarify on there, so the diagram on the left, it is not current standard, correct?
That's right.
Current standard would be one lot.
It would be maybe
Have one
one lot.
Yep. And Brady, I think a good illustration of your question or comment is that this structure back here is actually a barn. So let's say that the ag remainder is this area behind the wetlands, because it doesn't have private or public road access to support a single-family dwelling, but there could be a farm road back there. So that would be potentially an ag remainder, and then these could all be various sizes of single-family dwelling lots. But the density is applied to the front area.
But they still, so if there's an ag remainder, I guess I'm just still unclear. If that started out as a 40-acre piece, and they put the 4 houses on the front, left the back, say that the back's even 20 acres as an ag remainder, because the Anderson subdivision here tonight, I'm pretty sure that the property affiliated with that house was an ag remainder, but yet they come in and they split it tonight.
Yeah, so that originally, you approved it in January, I think, and they didn't have frontage for the ag remainder, but they were selling it as a buildable lot. And so, but they'd already recorded the plat, so they had to come in and get the frontage so that a house can be built on it in the future. But they're still going to have to come back again to make that a buildable lot, to take that.
And I'm okay with them doing that, but what's to stop these people from putting that back 20 into an ag remainder after they've got the 4 lots, and then come back in and get another building lot?
Yeah, so it's all tied to the parent parcel and the original subdivision boundary. So that 40-acre lot, the max you can get is 4. That they can be any size above that minimum half acre.
The only way it would ever change is if they came for a rezone request to switch it
And
to
that's kind of what
RU2.
happened with the Creekside Estates, which I think you're talking about, originally started out as an A10.
Smithfield.
Yeah, and then
Yep.
they came back and did the RU2 zone and then did a subdivision.
Yeah.
It's the
But
two-
they would not be able to rezone just that portion of the subdivision, that ag remainder, to get more density. They max
Would
out
be the whole piece.
the density for the
It's
original
the
parent.
2006 parent correct? The 2006 is the parent year
That's our
currently.
line for parcel legality now, but if the subdivision was done before that, then it's just what the
Still
subdivision.
be then.
Yep, so we,
1970 and then 2006, but that's the current. If it was a parcel in 2006, it is a legal parcel.
and I've received a few calls in the nearly 2 years that I've been here and saying, hey, we'd like to purchase this lot and potentially build a home on it. And I go to our well-kept GIS records and look at the lot and see that it's in a subdivision and report to them, this is an ag remainder and you could only put a barn on it. And so it really relies on that review. A couple more thoughts related to the developable area at the base of the slopes on this left example. You know, there's a notion of usable open space versus open space for visible open space. Sometimes in a rural county area versus a more of an urban area, there's more of an emphasis on recreational open space in an urban area, that designated area should be useful to the folks that maybe live on smaller lots or townhomes, then they have a common area. In the county, with limited numbers of units, they already have quite a bit of available room on a lot, and so this might be more just the way it looks rather than the way it functions, unless it has a trail or a good sleigh riding hill or something of that sort. So
I think a lot of property owners, you know, like to use that ag remainder tool, you know, to keep a portion of the property in Greenbelt. You know.
right, the 5 acres is a key size for that. And I suppose a sloping mountain with grazing could be that
You back?
remainder greenbelt as well. Okay, let's go to some text here.
So if you look, can you see if it's an ag remainder? Is it listed anywhere publicly?
That's a good question. Let's take the time to look at this together.
Okay.
You know, really, this is where we're encouraged to spend a lot of our planning commission meeting time, is having these good planning discussions and visiting code and policy and forming recommendations.
They're listed in the subdivision, so as when we approve a subdivision, it's listed, and it's listed on the plat as an ag remainder.
But when you look on the.
If you pull up the parcel viewer, you won't see it there.
You won't see it on the parcel viewer, but it is part of the.
It actually shows this one, all of agricultural remainder.
It does show that.
That was one of them out in North Smithfield. The piece of
Well,
it,
and you can,
So it's
if you
just
click
in
on that, you can get the plat
it
further
is in
down
the
on there.
description, in the legal description.
You do Denali.
but it's tied to the parcel through the subdivision, so.
Oh, it's still loading.
Okay, so this is our parcel viewer. This is actually our internal one, but it works the same on the, actually, no, maybe not. Let me do the one that the public has to look at. Because ours kind of default, so you do have to take one extra step on the public viewer to see that. But there'll be a hash tags around, or a hash lines, excuse me, it's not social media, around the
Hashtags.
property, the subdivision boundary that shows, oh, sorry.
Yeah, there's one right there,
Does it just give it?
That says all of ag remainder.
right in the middle.
Legal description.
So here you would go to our layers list, and then you could click the subdivision box, and it'll bring up those various subdivisions. So these are each a subdivision. If you go in and kind of click on it, we'll see this is the Lance Nilsson 2-lot farm minor. It's an older one from 2003, but this will give you the plat map. So this is one way to recognize it. It'll be actually on the plat that says, right here, remainder parcel, not eligible for residential use. Typically that note has been updated now to say not eligible for development, ag use only. But then when you also click on the parcel itself, and scroll over to get more information, you see this larger piece here that's outlined in the blue. Okay, this is not a great example, because the legal description should just say ag remainder for that subdivision.
And it does say, if you scroll down there, though, that it's greenbelt.
It does. Yeah. But yeah, typically the legal description, and maybe if I can find a newer subdivision, we'll have that.
Andrew, could you walk us through one more time how you got to where you're from the?
Oh, sure. So on the county website, we'll just start at the beginning here.
Where's your?
We have the homepage. There's a quick link to the parcel viewer and summary tool that the public has access to. You just kind of click into it. And then you can search by parcel, or you can zoom in or zoom out. But then you want to go to the layer list here, which is this like stack of papers up at the top. And that will give you different layers that you can put on. So in this instance, we're looking at subdivision, so we'll just click the subdivision box and it'll bring up all those red areas that are subdivisions. Then you also have different sensitive areas and stuff that you can look at as well. So this box is checked, but we need to expand it to kind of look at the other items like floodplain, steep slopes, which we're talking about right now. So that will kind of give you some idea. And then, yeah, you can go directly to the parcel in question to see what might be going on that property. Keep picking places without a lot of interesting stuff here. For instance, here's the floodplain, and it brings that up for all the parcels that we can see. This is within the city boundary, so that'll show you that as well. But yeah, that's how that worked. Did that answer your question? Sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. But I would like to, if I could, find one. Okay, so this one should give me the information I want. So here you can see this is all of agricultural remainder for that subdivision. So that's what they currently look like. That older subdivision had it a little different, but yeah, then it also has greenbelt because that's the tax status. So both those items will give you the information you need, as well as the plat itself as to what is an ag remainder or not. So.
Thank you. I'm doing a little drawing. That we'll refer back to in a moment. Okay, so here is text that you'll see. For those of you that worked on this with us a few months ago, you'll see some of the same text, and you'll also see some changes, and I'll try to suggest where the changes are from what you've last seen. But the key difference in the opening paragraph is that it still states that wetlands, steep slopes, and natural waterways are not developable, but crossed out is that they would be taken out of the density calculation. So crossed out that statement saying any acreage encumbered by these areas shall not be considered when calculating development density. And then it says, no development shall occur therein except for required public utilities and/or facilities. We've restated some limitation or exceptions to that. Also some helpful cross-references. For example, here, wetlands is defined by the U.S. Army Corps, and then refer to other places in our code, such as the sensitive areas chapter and definitions that would also relate to this and be helpful cross-reference. Steep slopes, took out this perhaps somewhat confusing distance over 20 feet. That's been a little bit tricky to understand, but just to state blanket that they're over 30%. And then natural waterways, and again, some cross-referencing there. Where we really start to explore.
Maybe before we move on, I mean, that language there may actually be beneficial, because I'm thinking of, you know, the argument we've had over this on, well, can you develop a borrow pit? You know, it's a 30% slope. And maybe that's the reason that is there.
I think so, and what we brought last time was I explored bumping it up to 50 feet. And the feedback received from you generally was that maybe there's a different way to describe it rather than somewhat of an arbitrary horizontal distance, because if someone has 55 and then all of a sudden they're back asking for a text amendment to make it to 60.
Yeah.
So we've tried to come up with a different way to suggest that there might be some steep slope areas that could be developed. And so that's this next little bit.
Great.
And a little context to that would be this depiction of 20% slopes, that sometimes we find these steep slope bands or pockets within moderate slopes or even non-moderate slopes, or just moderately sloping grade. And so that's kind of this red area indicating that there could be some steep slopes mixed into that. And then what you see kind of to the lower left and the upper right is a broader area, and we'll refer to this broader area. I will acknowledge this is a very preliminary idea, and it's not going to come anywhere close to being final, but we'd love your feedback and some discussion. Note that the study area, the broader study area on the left, reaches up into 30% slopes that continue to get steeper and steeper. The study area, the broader study area, the upper right, does not extend into that upper 30% or the continuing continuance of steep slopes. And you'll see a reference to that when we state in draft form that no development shall occur within these non-developable areas except for the following: required public roads, utilities, and/or facilities, and that's pretty much what our code allows for today, is those through steep slope areas. But to allow for private roads, drives, and utilities, we as staff had conversation about the three of these. There's some hesitation on including private drives, allowing private roads and utilities, but I think most staff felt that roads, drives, and utilities could be there, so I just wanted to point that out. Three, structures may, here's where we get to those study areas. Structures may be built on limited steep slope areas that lie within a broader land area based on the following. So A, the average grade of the total area must be less than 30% as measured perpendicular between highest and lowest elevation points. That would be of that broader study area. A slope elevation study and geotechnical report must be provided. And this broader land area must not include steep slopes that continue, no, this is not well worded, but continue to increase or drop in elevation past the measurement area. So that's a first attempt to somewhat describe that you can't really cheat. If you want to put houses up here above that 20% grade, it's more intended for these parts and pieces of steep slopes that right now are hindrance to folks using their property as they desire. That might be a good pausing point for some feedback, and then we could dig into some additional text.
I have a question.
Yes.
In the county, the municipal planners and the county planners get together and have meetings. How many municipalities have a slope requirement for their cities?
We've not taken time to take full inventory to answer that question, but there are numerous
I
communities
would
that have
think that
steep
would be
slope
something we would
limitations.
need to think about, especially when you're talking about the annexation zones and stuff that they're looking at from the, because I know Wellsville has a slope requirement in.
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of a community that doesn't have a.
So the most of them do. Do you know what it is? Is
In
it
my
30?
experience, yeah.
Is it
Most,
most of
if not
them
all,
30?
that I've worked in. And 30 is the
The limit.
fairly common limit, yeah.
Okay.
Some have restrictions on 20 to 30, and then above 30. So they kind of parse it out a little bit more.
I believe it was Providence that had the 50 linear feet one.
Yeah, or 30, or, yeah, 40, something.
Providence does.
And so we kind of explored that text last time, but it didn't fare very well in our review.
Chris, on your example, above 30, what was allowed there or restriction above that? Is that?
Yeah, usually, many communities, that 30% is non-developable above that. And I think,
So can you build on a 30 or the road is in the 30 and build on the 20, or how does that go?
that's maybe a nuance that I couldn't say or respond to with confidence, but just knowing more that there is a threshold at 30 and it's non-developable, and whether or not you can build a road on there or whatever. I'm less confident about.
Okay.
And what steep slopes can be graded away safely versus those that cannot.
And most require a geotechnical report and that sort of thing.
So has,
Anybody that's watched the news down in Draper lately would know
Yes.
why these things are important.
Yeah, but when it all come down to it, there was criticism for Draper City, and they said, we can't enforce it, it's up to their engineers, and
Yeah, that's right.
They filled the slope so it wasn't steep anymore. And then that filled slope disappeared.
That's right. It slid off a mountain.
Tim, has the fire department, safety department been in on any of this? Is what they're talking about? Some had reached out to me about it.
We need to involve more staff discussions. So we just, yes, we need more conversations with fire, engineering, and so forth.
Yeah, because they
Yep.
contacted me on some of that.
But certainly their 10% maximum grade of a private road or drive is applicable.
And that's the thing, right? You know, it's not just the governing jurisdiction saying greater than 30% is non-developable. I mean, it just becomes exponentially more expensive to build anything in something like that, let alone do it safely. And so, yeah.
I will also state that last time there was some discussion as to whether there should be an upper limit to private roads, whether they could be on 30% or greater slopes to any degree of steepness, or whether there should be a cap. And I think right now, I know, Matt, you offered some feedback that if maybe we don't create that cap in an actual steepness maximum, but allow the engineering standards to kind of dictate that. We had last looked at a 50% cap. That's kind of indicated here. Dirk requested that we not include it in this draft, an upper cap, but I'm just reminding that that was part of the conversation last time. So, yes, I think we're at a point where,
Well, that's where the fire contacted me, because as they've been talking about what potentially could go in Wellsville Canyon, and the response time of the Wellsville Fire Department getting up there within a certain amount of time, there was some concerns that you got back up into that higher part of where the subdivision was gonna go. So I know fire had some questions there.
it's good questions, and, you know, at what point is it a bit more of a recreational cabin than a full-time residence? So, more study, more conversation, but appreciate the
I had a
initial thoughts here.
quick question before you move on. Maybe on the non-developable, the definition, is there a need to I mean, would this would apply to all zones, right?
Yes.
Okay. I can see where it would be, like, to me, what we're looking at here and contemplating makes a lot of sense for A10, R40, that sort of thing, or, I'm sorry, FR40. You start to get into R2 and R5, and it becomes a lot more complicated, in my mind. You know, they're gonna have a hard time, like if you have a 10-acre lot and it's got a floodplain in it or wetlands or something like that, and you wanna get all 5 lots and half of your, or more than half of your properties in wetlands or what, you know, now you're crunched down to less than an acre size and you start to run into issues of, do I have enough room for septic?
But that
No
would
well
get, but that
really
would get
control
caught,
that.
that would get caught in the next step, right?
Yeah.
So that would still get
In
caught. I
theory.
think in our
In
current
theory.
process, that should, in my mind, I think if we write this correctly, then that would get caught through the review process. That, yeah, you can only get 4 lots there because you need X number of feet between your wells and your septic systems. Or you can get 5 lots, but you gotta figure out how to do a shared well with 3
Yeah.
of them.
Or to my point, is there a need to consider that the definition is different or doesn't apply to some of these higher density zones or something like that?
Appreciate that comment, Chris, and it reminds me that this text is also, was part of our previous draft, and it was, and I'll show the slides again, but it's a difference in calculating the density in the FR40 zone, that the net acreage is calculated by subtracting 50% of steep slope areas from the total gross property acreage.
Okay.
And that relates back to these graphics. We were looking at some private parcels in the forest area, the darker green being actual forest, U.S. Forest Service property, and a rough approximation of what the percentage of steep slope coverage is on each of these larger parcel areas. And so this is 734 acres, for example, is the total area of the land, and then half of that roughly would be steep slopes. So under our current code, those percentage of steep slopes areas would be deducted from the density calculation, and the 1,681 acres would result in 21 cabins. If half, I might have should have said 1/2 steep slope density,
Right.
was factored in when deducting or when considering those steep slope areas, then that would bump up to 28 cabins. If none of the steep slopes applied, you'd double the number of cabins from, what was that, 21 to about 41. And last time it seemed like there was maybe a comfort level with giving some additional density, but not the entire amount. So that's where the current draft stands.
I don't know, I guess FR40 kind of bothers me that we start, I would be fine on a 10 acre or 20 acre or whatever, somewhere here in the valley if there's some accommodation. But my personal opinion, just thinking quick on FR40 is, the whole reason that that was designed as FR40 is to still keep it somewhat so that we could have a home here or there, but keep it. So we had them people up the top of, or on Sardine Canyon come in a couple of years ago, and they were wanting at that time, well, they had 800 acres.
Wanted.
And they were
810.
wanting to plaster, you know, homes on that place, and I'd sure hate to see them guys get a deal like this, put all them homes right there on the frontage, then we just got another subdivision.
Well, and of course, these are seasonal cabins, and so they wouldn't have the same number of trips and level of
But
services.
that's
and so
only my
forth.
opinion, but I think it kind of defeats the purpose of the, I guess each area could be different, but is that what we want to see, is 80 homes there in that little area, that couple of fields?
Well, I guess I guess this is a pretty good example. I mean, you've got almost 1,700 acres there, and you go, you know, 21 to 41, 40, 21 to 41 cabins. Is that, I mean, it doubles the density, but it's over 1,700 acres. Are you gonna notice?
If you drive by it on something that big. Like you said, if they're all right along the frontage on little lots.
Well, they usually
But-
could be, because that's taking 800 acres and putting them on an acre. I mean, is that what we want to see?
Yeah, it's a good point.
I don't think so.
I would point out that, assuming my math is correct here, you know, sometimes we round to the nearest 40, right? So if you're 75 acres, you get one cabin. And so when you add up this total acreage of 1681, even when nearly doubling the number of potential cabins by not deducting the steep slopes from the density calculation, if I divide 1681 by 41, see 1681 divided by 41 is 41. So it's still 1 unit per 40 acres in this particular example.
Yeah.
In this particular example, 1681
For 800.
divided by 21 is 80 acres. So it's kind of deceiving in a way.
Oh, yeah.
There was one more variation of this, and that was the notion that this is kind of a creative twist.
Same on everything.
But this idea allows for the full density, or gross density, without deducting steep slopes, if there's a certain standard of clustering or transferring units. So you see some of these more remote sites that are harder to reach and develop get transferred over, and so there's just more protected areas and then a slightly more concentrated version of cabins. Doesn't mean they have to be on super tight lots, but it's less dispersed.
Tim, does the white in the main center there that's got 18 on it, does the white represent buildable areas?
Yes.
Those little circles,
No,
Or
the lighter color,
white
the
itself.
tan.
oh, that's less than 20% slopes.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
it.
so, but how are we gonna do it? If we change the regulations, you've dispersed it how you would like it to work, but what's gonna stop them from putting them all right in the center section?
Well, to be determined, right? That this represents the notion that,
And on one like this, your scenario wouldn't, right, this is a piece of private property that right now is in the middle of FR, or in the middle of Forest Service, right? Potentially, it could be gated private land already. So if they build those private cabins, the public still isn't going to see that, because they're not driving through that private land.
Well, I'd be
A number of the times,
less
sometimes they
opposed to
could
it
be.
with the first, if you go back one. See, so that's dispersed greater than your next one. Your next one, you're bringing them in. Yeah, tighter.
yeah, and let's say that this 734 acre piece is subdivided and it goes through kind of it meets the standards of protecting sensitive areas and sensitive areas for habitat, and it benefits them because they're cutting less road and it's more efficient.
More efficient, yeah.
So there may be a win-win there. But let's say that even if of that 734 acres, they develop, 25% of that, that's, 734 times 0.25 is 183 acres divided by 18. Those are 10-acre lots on average, which is not too bad for cabin sites, but it keeps the roads and the development from extending out into a broader area and probably more beneficial to habitat and watershed and so forth. So it's kind of an incentive to cluster, but it doesn't mean they're on half-acre lots or 2-acre lots necessarily.
But I agree with Brady. How are you forcing that? I mean, if just as Nate said, that's private property, the reason you're in the forest recreation area is for space, so they're gonna be back in those nooks and crannies to have privacy and everything else. So when you talk about your clustering or trading it off, you've got to come up with some incentive. And here, I don't see the incentive.
Yeah, right, this would be a
Same
new,
numbers
The
there.
incentive is to the developer or the landowner. I mean,
Only,
it
yes.
costs less
Right.
to do it more condensed like that.
well, in terms
But I
of,
hope we're sticking to because as you're talking about this, FR 40, no matter what we do, it's one house for 40 acres, no matter how we do that. Because what you were talking about on Sardine, One thing we were able to look at is he couldn't convince that the FR40 could be agricultural and taking it down to
To
agricultural.
go to A10.
He only had them frontage fields.
Exactly, so that stopped, but yet he went to Box Elder and they allowed it, so. Interesting point on how changing from FR40 to A10, you gotta prove the agricultural side.
Yeah. Yeah, this is just a scenario of if there was a desire to promote clustering and transferring so that there's less dispersed development and roads and weeds and whatever that come with all of that, that more primitive forested areas remain intact. If that's something the county wanted to promote and provide a density bonus for it, this is what that could look like. This is with just the gross density without the steep slopes, with no density bonus incentive or cluster or transfer requirement associated with that density bonus. And then this is the half 50% of steep slopes, and then this is none. So they're just pure options, and they speculate on a potential code amendment if we.
Well, that's why I say we need to bring the fire in here, because you go to Bear Lake now, and now they're having to build fire restriction zones from the cabins and everything else because of a forest fire coming through. You would almost have to be considering this in a sense as well.
For sure. And what's more beneficial, to be clustered or dispersed in that setting? I don't know.
Either way,
Good
if it's
question.
up the canyon, they're gone before the fire department gets there. So, you know, she's gone one way or another. It doesn't matter if they're close or far apart. They're not driving up Ant Flat Road to put a fire out.
I will
Save the
say,
cabin.
I think this graphic is somewhat misleading, and those circles are not to scale, so they may.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at on that 80-acre one, if you didn't do the steep slope, it's 2 on 80 acres. And if you think an 80-acre field with 2 cabins on it, that's pretty sparse.
Yeah.
Still, as opposed to 1 on the 80 acres.
Yep. So, those different options, and in the draft text is the option of
The 50%.
giving a little more lean to the property right equation. I think we'd have to evaluate other areas to see what the resulting end density is, and it may be that in most cases it's usually much less dense than 1 unit per 40 acres, just because of that rounding up or down 40 units leaves a lot of acreage in the remainder.
Another thing that this could do though also is, and I kind of gather from you that you want it denser, but if we make it more dense, it's gonna incentivize. I think we're gonna see a lot more development in the FR40 because the cost is gonna be less.
I will clarify that
Developer putting roads in.
I think, I mean, my thoughts about it are that we hear property owners asking if they could rezone to get more units. And my thoughts are that and recommendation to consider is that if there are increased units, then what pattern should they be in? And what's the right balance? Should there be encouragement for clustering and transferring if density is increased? And what are the trade-offs of that? And what does it mean for, and it might be the way that they want to develop anyway, just to reduce their costs.
Yeah, to me, on the FR40s, the clustering, to give them a little extra bonus for clustering doesn't make near as much sense as it does right down in the valley where there's gonna be full-time homes. You want them clustered because of the roads, the maintenance, right? This is gonna be, those mountain ones to me just seem, it's pretty sparse anyways. But yeah, I think a lot of them are gonna want to cluster because, yeah, instead of building 50 little roads out to each cabin. I mean, if you look at if you go around the west in the mountains, that's how most little mountain subdivisions are, right? They're still pretty dense when you get right in them. Dense, pretty loose term, as to the piece that was developed, because it's a lot easier to put in that infrastructure for the developer. Whether he's getting 10 lots or 20 lots on that 400 acre parcel.
So they might self-elect it. If they got a bonus one way or the other, they might just do it this way anyway.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's our current regulations,
Push
you know,
them that way.
without an incentive, the incentive is there to just you know, put your lots along an existing road, have them be small lots, give yourself an agricultural remainder so you can have a lower tax on that ag remainder parcel and that sort of thing. And so, and you don't have to get a bonus for any of that. The incentive is already there. And for those who choose not to go that route, they can still divide up into 10-acre lots if they want.
I definitely feel the need and appreciate the suggestion that we find the time to involve other departments, fire, engineering. We haven't had a lot of time for that, so we need to make the time.
Good questions with fire. Does it matter if there's 21 parcels, cabins, or 40, right?
I think they're gonna say what you said.
It doesn't matter,
They're gonna
yeah.
wanna make sure that they, you know, have
That
an
they-
accessible
that they
road.
can get there when the
Yes.
road needs to be, but if there's one or two, it's still gonna burn down before they get there. Correct. But we do need a good road. Matt's got a comment. I can see him squirming.
Yeah, come on up, man.
I can see you. You're gonna throw something if I didn't call on you.
I just want to make two quick comments, and I'm here just to kind of see where we're going. I think the question was asked, how many other communities have something over 30%? It's pretty much 100% from what I've seen in my career. They'll have different things. So most of the time, if you want to build over 20%, you'll have some grading and drainage type permit that you need to get that would be above and beyond your normal stuff. If you're on the flat ground, right, you don't need a special permit. So if you're over 30%, now you need it's another type of permit with a few more requirements. We haven't looked into it to tell you exactly what those may or may not be, but that's kind of how you control where it is. And if you can get a professional engineer to help you modify your soils or your slopes, you may be able to do it. So as I kind of see where you guys are going, the engineering department can start looking into that. We haven't really. The other part is kind of a discussion is in Washington County, they still have steep slopes, floodways, those types of things that are considered non-developable. And you have buildable area, you have non-developable area, but they'll allow 20% of that non-developable area to be counted towards your buildable area to increase the density. So it's not necessarily clustering, but they'll give you a certain percentage of that. You can never exceed what you would have normally got, but you get to take, say, a certain percentage of that non-buildable area and kind of transfer it to the buildable spots on your lot. So there's certain percentages. You could have 50, 20, 30. So usually there's some, you're not saying you just can't do anything with your steep slopes. But it's not 100%. You get to take all that density and put it on the small ones. It may be a 20% or some variation of a percentage that they'll allow you to grant for that. So again, we haven't looked into that type of stuff either. We're happy to. That's really more Tim's wheelhouse than mine. But once we kind of see where you guys are going with the steep slopes, the engineering can start looking into what kind of requirements and then present something to you guys on a permit or some type of geotechnical report or standards that we feel would be appropriate to allow people to build in those types of areas, whether it be public or private. There'll still be things that are not allowed. You're not going to allow someone to build a storm drain pond on a 30% slope. So there's going to be some things that are just, you can't build them on a 30%. You're not going to open it up to everything, but there might be some items such as roads or utilities that may be allowed. So,
Matt,
yes.
you talked about a 20% potential on a slope and that. Have there been any counties that define that with waterways or protected waterways or anything else that way too? Or how does that go?
I'm not sure if I'm following you, Nolan, as far as the waterways.
So are they excluding anything that's a water or wetlands or anything else, or do you get to take a percent of that?
If you're talking about like the banks of the wetlands, most of those are usually not. Those are, at that point, you're going to get into a floodway or a different type of classification. So we're talking more of like the hills. Mm-hmm. Washington County, for example, they kind of have an ordinance that kind of discusses how they define slopes and hills, and part of it is, you know, if you guys are familiar with Smithfield, right, they tore down part of SV. Part of their ordinance was to protect the nature, the community values, and So they kind of have a lot playing into that, but I'm not aware, in any of my engineering career, Nolan, I've never had to do the steep slope analysis for like riverbanks or those types of things. It's been, you know, you're looking at the hills, the mountains, those types of things, and the surveyor and the engineers will provide those maps, and that's part of that requirement. You want to build on this, or you want to do a subdivision plat, you need to provide, you know, contours that are certified by an engineer at certain scale and show all those slopes so that the planning commission, engineering, land use authority can accurately see where those things are and kind of guide you through the process. And but so
Not kicking you.
I would say many communities have sensitive lands ordinances, and they consider all those categories non-developable, or they may allocate a proportion that you can use towards your density.
I found this 20% on steep slopes interesting.
Yeah.
It's a starting point.
Portion.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think what we've been talking about is, you know, 100%, like it's not going to count against you necessarily. We haven't put those boundaries in there anyway.
So I'm taking comments as I can here. I'm curious if there's specific feedback to this section here, particularly 3, A, B, and C, where we may allow for some more incidental steep slopes within a broader area. It certainly needs more study and testing, but is it on the right track in your mind?
Yeah, I think that's the right
I think it
direction.
is.
Yeah, the first read through for me, I thought
Thinking
it was going the right way
of the
too.
challenges that we've had, I mean, I think this addresses those, you know, access to, you know, we've got a level parcel, but we need to have a road to get to that part that's totally developable. That, I think that addresses that side of it.
And I'd like to look at, and it's a lot of time for you, but to pull up a number of different size subdivisions in the 4 different zones and see how taking those, because a lot of them don't have any sensitive areas anyways, or minimal, but the ones that do, take that out and see how it could have changed those subdivisions. So we have some more real life,
Or is there a way to use the GIS data to see,
To pull
you know,
those
the
out.
percentage of sensitive?
because I think even on the smaller ones, the RU2s and R5s, it's not gonna be very many more lots. You know, but that may be where we want those
I mean,
couple
there-
extra lots, and so we're not gobbling up the next 40-acre parcel of farmland to put 4 homes on. You know, my subdivision's a perfect example. It could have had one more lot if there weren't river bottoms on it that could or could not be wetland. I just said they were because it was easier to get through the process. But right, one more house in between mine and my brother's on that 2-acre hayfield, no one's gonna know driving by.
Right.
And I think if we can put, not that I'm ever gonna put a house there, because I don't want anyone to live next to me, but look, those
Yeah,
ones,
maybe
I
that's more
think,
suitable.
yeah, I think it's more suitable for those to add another house in the county than chop up another ag field. You know, because again, we don't do a lot of them, right? How many RU2s do we approve each year? Not very many. And ones with sensitive lands is even less. So I'd just like to see some of those numbers to see what it, because in my mind, thinking back and looking at when you pull that subdivision layer up, it's pretty minimal of what it would do.
And maybe see if you know, from the GIS data, is there a way to look at the percentage of sensitive lands per
Zoning category.
per zoning category, or per parcel, you know, to see what the impact would be on that. If, you know, you could do gross numbers, but you could do on average and see, you know, what would that result in? I know that's
I'm guessing
that's a
most
lot of
of them.
calculation there, but there may be a way in the GIS data, just pull that up and say, this would be the overall impact of that. If every parcel developed out to their full potential under that, which we know won't happen. Anyway,
That'd be interesting. We got some creative folks in our GS department for sure. I think it's worth mentioning too that we're finding situations where our rough steep slope data based off of very very large elevation squares or grids.
Yeah.
Doesn't capture the detail or the nuance of steep slopes. So sometimes in studying development potential, more steep slopes are discovered, and it creates some challenges for calculating, they're verifying and discovering density calculations and so forth, so.
You know, it reminds me, like, Tim, I think when we worked together many years ago in Ogden Valley or whatever, and we looked at the existing zoning, and we said, this is how many houses could be here, you know, under the current zoning. I mean, if we looked at, say, the whole A10 area, and we layered on these sensitive lands, and we figured out, okay, you know, if you exclude the sensitive lands, we could have this many units, you know, if every
Exactly.
10-acre parcel got developed, right? Versus if we allow the non-developable areas to be counted, it would add this many more units, you know, is it 5% more units or 10% or is it 50% more units? I mean, I think that would maybe help
Because if the
inform us a
number
little
came
bit.
in, it was 5% more units, this is probably a gimme. It's probably
Right.
like, well, 5% spread across the entire county, and that's not all gonna be developed in,
Right.
in 30 years.
Developed.
Right.
You guys recall in Wellsville, I was just trying to find that. Was it Murray's that come in and wanted the subdivisions in the west side of Wellsville? And because of steep slopes,
It was Mons,
Hendon,
wasn't
wasn't
it?
it?
or Mons, yeah, I think it was, but
Yeah.
that would be one we could take a look at. I can't remember how many total gross acres the property was, but we did limit it. There was some restriction there on the homes if they'd have divided it into 10 acres versus what they actually got with there because of the land. I can't remember, that was a year or two.
Is this the one, not Wellsville, more Mount Sterling? Is this by the church?
It's north of Wellsville, up against
north.
it.
I think it was between Johnson's Pit and the highway west of Wellsville, but
Oh, I can't remember that.
I'm not finding it.
I recall one near,
North Pine Canyon Ranch may be what you're thinking.
Yes.
It is.
A good memory. Pine Canyon Ranch.
Along 4600 South in, just north of Wellsville.
Oh, north.
Well, yeah, it's a little north, more
4600
just
right
west
there.
of Wellsville, but yeah, 4600 up from the school, the elementary school.
Weren't they starting with some FR 40 and then changing to A10 and then also because of slope?
Too.
Yeah, that, the part of the back, ag remainders were, FR 40, and so they did come and do a rezone.
Yes.
That's why.
Wasn't the one down in Mount Sterling by the church property?
Right there.
Oh, is that the one? Okay, that's the one. Because I was thinking that one had that same challenge. I didn't think that was the.
That one, that comes to the question, I mean, like you brought up borrow pits, I mean, in their property, they're taking washes, so there's slopes, but how far and how deep, you know,
Yeah,
length or height of that slope or whatever else is inside of
I
there.
think that's important.
Well, I think that's
And the
where,
one southwest of Mendon as well, didn't that one have? One that had road access issues.
oh, going across the canal. Yeah, and that one, yeah, the canal.
It seemed like that one had some additional, so maybe a few examples then of subdivisions that we've actually looked at.
okay.
The data's already been crunched and we have the numbers.
We have an ANSI question from the audience, so I'm gonna take one just because they come and sit through every meeting, so I feel bad.
Some comments on the code?
Yep.
Some
Yes,
feedback
but you
on
gotta
the
come up here so
discussion.
you can state your name.
Hi, my name's Lindsay Hawks. So I have a couple comments of what you're discussing here. The biggest issue with this code is there's a difference between non-developable and non-buildable, and that keeps being used interchangeably. So what we don't build on is talked about in other areas of the code, but we keep talking about that here. This is about what can be developed, as in subdivided, as in density. So when we're talking about can a property with these slopes build a house on it, that's not this part of the code. And you guys will have to correct me if I'm wrong. This part of the code is specifically, which is interesting, because you talk about other communities and whether they use this language, they don't. They talk about non-developable or non-buildable. See, it's getting mixed up. So they say you can't build on this, these are the restrictions, but they don't say it comes out of your acreage. There's not a single code, city or county in Utah, that has this language of non-developable and saying it doesn't count to your acreage.
There could be some.
I was gonna say, isn't that what Matt referred to as the 20%?
Yeah, they have the density like the county, and the steep or the sensitive areas that they consider are not, you can't count those as part of your density, but they'll allow 20% of that to go count towards
Your
your
density.
buildable spot. So it is kind of, they're not using the exact same terms, but it's the same concept, but they do limit your densities for steep slopes.
Maybe that's what
You
we should,
can't
because they're
count
the
that
only other
towards your
county.
density.
So we just have to be careful with the language. Because that gets very confusing, especially when people are coming in to subdivide and they're or to build. They're coming in to build, but we're talking about it's non-developable, or they're coming in to subdivide and we're talking about it's not buildable. Those are two different conversations. Yes.
And it is in that same section as well, right up to the top, yeah.
That part.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it is right in their density, so yeah.
Yeah. So, I don't know, and that's some of, when you're talking about what you can build or not build, that comes back to, the engineering and zoning, and not what takes place in the subdivision process with that development, at that development stage. Will you show your graph, your first one that you had? I also just wanted to point out his first graphic. We mentioned that the one on the left is not up to code, but we didn't. The one on the right is also not up to code.
Correct.
That would not be
Yeah.
allowed.
Yep.
Because it's 40 acres, so yeah, they wouldn't get 4 homes.
You only get 2 or maybe 3, depending on those acres.
Right. Which is similar, they mentioned our property. That's what our property looks like. It just has a dry riverbed that runs through it. So we have 20 plus acres. And because of this dry bed, it takes about 2 acres out of the 20. So it just puts us below. Which I'm glad you brought up agricultural remainder, because like in our case, the 2 building lots aren't anywhere near the steep slopes. The steep slope is in the ag remainder. So it's kind of like, why would that even apply to the building part? Because it has nothing to do with our subdivision part, right? Because we're not trying to build on steep slopes. So anyway, those are just some of my thoughts.
Sure, thank you.
See, being at this long, boring meeting paid off, right?
Yeah.
He's an engineer, so he said it better than me.
Just briefly, I'll mention, we could pull up our definition of development, but it's pretty broad, and it encompasses roads, infrastructure, and buildings. So it's kind of everything in our current definition.
I don't know how much I have to add. I'm Joe Hawks, also interested in this because it impacts us, but engineers don't say things better, that's for sure. I know too many engineers for that.
I didn't want to offend you.
Yeah, no, I will confirm that. But I do know GIS. I've actually looked at how many parcels this impacts, and of course you don't need to trust me. I hope your GIS department goes through these same steps, but I've estimated, based on the GIS data that the county has, that it's, 357 parcels would go from non-subdividable to subdividable. That's about 3% of the parcels in the county. So things like that. And I think this is so broad, too. In the code right now will restrict an area. I have figures, but I don't really have a great way to show them. I can hand them to anybody who wants them after. But it restricts areas that, could have 70% of their areas steep slopes versus an area that has, 1% and it just barely drops it under. So it really doesn't address the nuances that you get when different subdivisions come in and apply. And of course, we're, like my wife said, we're more focused on the subdivision part. That's what we're looking at. I fully support the county restricting building on steep slopes. Even the county code right now says the sensitive areas are there to protect the general health, welfare, and safety of citizens, minimize property damage, provide awareness of sensitive areas, and then finally, define the developable acreage. I think that last part is what's hanging us up in what's the developable acreage. The other parts need to be supported, right? The homes that are being built on steep slopes, if they want to do that, they need to make sure they have the proper things. But this covers a lot of cases where that doesn't apply. It's not protecting safety, it's just moving these properties so they can't be used in the way that the owners want to. So, thank you. And like I said, I have figures if anybody wants to see them after.
Good discussion.
Very good discussion. It may be worth,
57 more pieces of code we need to do the same thing on.
there's a lot of work to be done. It might be worth just reviewing some additional language that could help to clarify density, or define it. A legal parcel or lot under A, it's kind of an example that is less in size than the minimum zoning density acreage, is developable provided that all development standards required in this title and other applicable county and state code requirements are met. So we get that question quite a bit at the counter. Well, my parcel's less than 10 acres, and then we look to see if it was established in '06. And so just some cross-reference and understanding that it doesn't necessarily have to be 10 acres as long as it's a legal parcel. Each dwelling unit must be built on a separate parcel or lot. C, lots in a subdivision may be clustered, as allowed in section 1602-060. And then an example of that and defining, these are things that we have to explain at the counter, and it'd just be nice to have it maybe in one place. And then if we have a little bit of a user's guide online, how do I explore developing my property? There could be links to the code and a little more self-explanatory.
I think it might be helpful, as we were discussing earlier, if you're gonna use an example and you make the point that it could be as small as a half an acre, you have to include, assuming it will, meet the requirements for a septic drain field and a well
Setbacks from the
spacing,
well.
and that sort of thing, right?
Yeah. We'll work on that.
Sure.
So clarity is kind of what we're going for here, and okay. D, the density or total number of dwelling units is limited by all development standard. Oh, that's kind of addressing what you suggested, Chris, but
Okay.
we could work on that and make sure it flows, right?
Yeah.
And be more specific than just saying there are other standards, but such as well and septic.
Yeah.
And then E, density calculated in the FR40 zone, we covered that, is maybe that's the formula you want to explore, is not reduce all of the limitation for density calculation in that area. I think it was Weber County that has that 50% that Angie looked up. So we've done our best to refer to a few places, but I think per Nolan's question, there could be more comprehensive research done. Something good for some of our new planners to focus on. We do have a new Planner 1. We interviewed for Planner Tech today, Planning Tech, and a new countywide planner that Planner 1 and Countywide Planner will start full-time next week. They've just been working part-time while they wrap up their studies at Utah State and their degrees. A lot of training, a lot of things going on, but we'll do our best to get information to you.
Is E current code, or
No,
No,
none of that is then?
no.
no.
It's a good first step, Tim.
Thank you all for the discussion and feedback.
Need to tweak and do some more studying on it.
Okay, we'll bring it back with some more studies and
You know,
information.
Jason talked about looking at zones and that. We're talking FR40. How much private ground do we have in the county that's in FR40? There's a lot, but
60,000 acres, that's a rough guess.
Yeah, let's get that figure to you.
Well, I would guess you're at least that, somewhere in that range.
it would be nice to know from
It
what
is
we've done.
kind of helpful context, I think,
And then how much of it is
But-
accessible, yep.
There's also about 30 that's already in a conservation easement that's never gonna be split, so we're pretty good.
So if they,
You got from the mouth of Blacksmith Fork Canyon to Ant Flat Road in a Forest Legacy easement. So none of that is ever gonna come before us, which is pretty good. That's a pretty good swath.
yeah, well, knowing all that as we're considering this.
Most of the rest you have is south of that. And most of it's in, I mean, there's a little bits north, but most of it's in the south end.
If you're from the south end, your perception is there's a lot of private ground
If you're from the north
in
end,
the FR 40. If
yeah.
you're from the north end, it's,
Here's a rough visual, just the
Green.
green is the FR 40s.
You
Of
turn
course, a
on,
lot of
But,
that's.
yeah, that's
forest-
all,
that's
yeah,
Forest
yeah,
Service,
now
yeah.
click on the private parcels.
we're gonna turn on US Forest Service.
There we
Should
go.
make it darker.
Yeah.
Public. Typing.
The reason I say that is because on the south end, as we talk about roads and everything else, there are people waiting to jump and do some development there, so
yeah,
understanding that would be interesting.
yeah.
Turn off FR 40. To get rid of public in that. That's not a perfect portrayal of it, but if you could remember where that FR 40 area was and then see the area that's not colored, that would be private. We could make it more
All on
clear
the south end.
map and
They
calculation.
got a way to mark the conservation and the protected area on that?
Yeah,
Yeah, I think some of those are, if they've been recorded,
conservation
they'd
easements.
be on there.
Protection areas.
Yeah, ag protection areas has a layer.
Yep, we'll produce that for you next meeting.
What's the light green east of Richmond and Smithville?
That's wilderness. Wilderness, Mount Naomi Wilderness up there. Then you have the top of the Wellsvilles.
But that,
Still
yeah,
all
it's all
Forest
Forest Service, all Forest Service
Yeah.
homes, so that'll never be affected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My 60,000 acres
The
livable,
area
probably
that I
100,000
am-
acres.
and-
Look at that.
Yeah, I can see that.
Just,
Just to the east of Providence. Yeah, those areas.
some of these areas were what I was analyzing
Oh,
in
yeah.
the slides,
Yeah.
There are a few up in
just pockets. And so, you know, if, it may be that clustering as an incentive is not necessary, but there might be some areas that are very difficult to develop and very sensitive, and maybe there's a incentive to transfer those elsewhere, and it'd be acceptable to increase the density a little to put another area in complete
Incentivize that.
protection.
Sure.
Or know that there's no way for them to ever get to them to build a cabin anyway, too.
Yeah.
Forest Service, they're never
But-
gonna get the road permit to,
Or
for some of those.
if someone with enough money comes along and they do what was done up in Box Elder County and,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know.
But the area up by, where White Pine Creek comes in, White Pine Canyon, in Logan Canyon, there are a number of cabin developments up there, and that could impact that portion of the canyon. Go just before Franklin Basin turnoff.
Okay, well, we've got some homework from you. We appreciate the feedback, and we'll produce as much of that information as possible and look at what the Hawks have provided and bring it back next month.
Right?
Thank you.
How does next month look, Angie?
Not too bad. A rezone, a CUP amendment for Maple Rise Campground, and a subdivision. And then our new director, I think, will be in place by then as well. I think he starts June 4th, so he should be at that meeting.
Lane has volunteered to take the chair for the next 2 months as I'll be gone.
Did you have any questions or comments? Yeah. Just happy to be here.
Related to business, I have Melinda Lee's iPad to give to a new planning commissioner, and then we're trying to figure out if there's one more that's been,
Brady should, or Brandon.
Should be. We've
Brandon
had-
should have had one, right?
I don't think he did.
He
Who,
did. Oh, yeah,
Phil?
he always used his own.
I don't think Brandon had
Yeah, I don't
county
think he
when
ever
he used
did.
his own.
we'll have to see if we have an,
Yeah, when he handed those out, he didn't want one because he didn't want another thing to track.
is that an iPad? And do you have an iPad? But
Yeah, I've got an old one.
We provide the planning commissioners an iPad. We just have one today, so maybe I could send this with you. If you don't mind, we'd set it up, or you could arm wrestle over it.
I don't care, so.
Rock, paper, scissors.
I'm good.
But we'll catch up. If you prefer to use a county iPad, we'll provide that for you.
Okay.
And we can also give you the link to change the cover if you'd like, if light green is not your jam.
Oh,
Don't put a pink flower on it. You'll be
Yeah, that'd be good.
I recommend Van Gogh.
Okay, if there are no objections, we will adjourn. Didn't hear any.